Here's the truth no one wants to hear. The strongest men, are often the ones most quietly on the edge of collapse. Not because they are weak, but because they have spent their lives believing strength means silence, that to endure without complaint is the highest virtue, that being dependable is more important than being known, and so they carry the burden, all of it. The emotional chaos of their families, the instability of their relationships, the silent fear that if they ever falter, everything will fall apart. They internalize pain as duty, convert grief into function, and perform their roles with mechanical consistency. They are thanked, relied upon, even admired, but they are not heard. They are not asked. They are not seen. These men exist beneath the surface of every society, in office buildings, in marriages, in friendships. They are the ones who fix problems no one else will touch. They are the ones who know what time the bills are due, who stay calm when others collapse, who say, "I'll handle it," even when they're exhausted. And no one asks what it costs them. No one wonders what happens to a man who lives as a system, not a soul. Jordan Peterson has spoken often about the weight men carry in silence, the chaos they absorb, not because they are forced to, but because they believe it is their moral obligation to do so. 'Tis not weakness that makes men quiet. It is the belief that to speak is to fail, to cry is to destabilize, to say "I can't" is to betray the very identity they've spent a lifetime constructing. But that identity, the quiet, competent, ever-dependable man, comes at a price. Over time, his internal world becomes a battlefield of unexpressed fear. Ungrieved losses, unmet needs. His language narrows. His voice weakens. He learns to survive, not to live. And when meaning begins to evaporate, he does not cry out. He simply carries more. Until one day he disappears, not physically, but emotionally, spiritually, existentially, present but absent, functional but hollow. You may be this man, or you may know him. The one who never asks for anything but always shows up. The one who holds it together while others unravel. The one who hasn't felt hurt in years, but continues to nod and smile as if everything's fine. But it's not fine. And you know it. You feel it in your chest, in the heaviness of your breath, in the quiet rage that simmers just beneath your controlled exterior. This is not just a personal crisis. It is a cultural failure. We have raised generations of men to believe that their worth lies in what they can endure, not in who they are. That to be strong is to absorb, suppress, and withstand. We've trained them to be stoic, but not stoic in the way Seneca or Marcus Aurelius meant, not as wise bearers of truth and order, but as silent beasts of burden, useful so long as they do not break. And when they do break, when anxiety becomes unbearable, when loneliness becomes a quiet form of grief, when exhaustion turns into despair, they often do so in isolation. No one sees it coming because no one was ever taught to look. The man who carries everything often dies long before his body does. He becomes a ghost in his own life, half present, emotionally muted, relationally exhausted, but it doesn't have to stay that way. And here is the turning point, the realization that silence is not always virtue, that unspoken pain is not noble, it is corrosive, that bearing the burden does not make you a man unless you choose the burden with full consciousness and moral clarity. Responsibility is sacred, but responsibility without voice, without boundary, without meaning, that is a prison disguised as discipline. It turns men into machines. And no man was born to be a machine. If you feel this weight, this quiet suffocation of purpose, you are not broken. You are not weak. You are awakening to the reality that something in your life has been misaligned. That the strength you've built has come at the cost of your soul, and that it is not too late to reclaim what has been buried under years of forced silence. This reclamation begins not with noise, but with truth, with acknowledging that carrying everything doesn't make you strong, it makes you invisible. And no man can live well unseen. The man who carries everything and speaks nothing lives in a state of internal contradiction. Outwardly, he is the foundation, the stabilizer, the quiet operator who ensures life remains functional. Inwardly, he is fractured, not because he has failed, but because he has never been allowed to simply be. He is praised for his discipline, but punished for his emotion, respected for his usefulness, but dismissed when he reaches beyond it. The very traits that made him indispensable have also made him dispensable. The world needs what he does, but not who he is. And this is the deepest fracture in the modern male psyche. Man learns to identify with his function, not his essence. From a young age, he is told, directly or through omission, that his worth is earned, not inherent. That he must prove himself, justify his presence, and earn love through performance. Emotional need becomes a liability. Vulnerability becomes a risk. And so he adapts. He becomes useful. He becomes good. He becomes silent. But silence is not peace. It is not a sustainable path to meaning. Meaning, as Jordan Peterson has often said, is found through voluntary responsibility, not blind servitude. Meaning is born when a man chooses his burden, when he understands its moral purpose, when he speaks its weight aloud and owns it. But many men today are carrying inherited burdens, family trauma, absent fatherhood, dysfunctional systems, and they do so with no guidance, no ceremony, and no shared language for what they are enduring. They are not choosing these burdens. They are surviving them. That survival takes many forms. For some, it's a quiet depression, a numbness mistaken for maturity. For others, it's chronic irritability, the simmering tension that lashes out at small things because no one sees the deeper wounds. And for others still, it is withdrawal, a slow retreat from the world, from dreams, from relationships, not because they don't care, but because they are depleted beyond recognition. You may see yourself in this. You may have gone years without asking yourself what you need, what you want, what you feel. You may have convinced yourself that to want anything more is selfish, that to stop and rest is weakness. But rest is not weakness. Wanting more is not selfishness. It is a return to truth. A man who suppresses his inner world long enough will eventually believe it doesn't exist. He will look into the mirror and not recognize what looks back. And that is the tragedy of the modern overburdened man. He loses his reflection, not because he is broken, but because he was never permitted to fully form. And here the question must be asked: what would happen if such a man spoke? Not to complain, not to accuse, but to name what he carries, clearly, cleanly, without apology. To say, this is too much. This is not mine. This is what I need. What would happen if he stopped equating his silence with strength and his pain with shame? The answer is not simple. Some relationships would shift. Others would end. The false identities would crack. But what remains would be real. And in that reality, a man can stand. He can build. Not on performance, but on principle. Not on expectation, but on essence. This transition, from silent burden bearer to principled truth speaker, is not comfortable. It is a form of death, the death of who he pretended to be. But in that death is rebirth. A man who speaks honestly, who sets limits with conviction, who reclaims his voice. He becomes dangerous in the best sense. Not reckless, not loud, but immovable. Because he no longer serves out of guilt. He serves out of purpose. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. The same is true of silence. The longer you stay silent about what matters, the more your soul absorbs that silence and turns it into identity. You start believing the lie that your pain doesn't matter, that your story is irrelevant, that your presence is conditional, and slowly your life becomes a shadow of what it could have been. This is not the path of a man. It is the path of a hostage, and it must end. A new way begins with truth. Hard truth. You must learn to separate what is yours to carry from what you've been told to carry. You must speak even if your voice shakes. You must define your values, your mission, your limits, or others will do it for you. No one else can do this work for you, but the world is starving for men who do it, who walk upright, eyes open, voice intact, not shouting for validation, but speaking because they know what is real. The modern man must make a difficult choice. He can continue to carry everything, the weight of others' failures, the burden of unspoken expectations, the emotional chaos of his environment, and slowly dissolve into functional irrelevance. Or he can stop, not to surrender but to recalibrate, to ask with brutal honesty, why have I accepted this as mine? Who benefits from my silence? What would change if I stopped performing strength and started embodying it? This question is not rhetorical. It is existential. Because the answer defines the difference between a man who survives and a man who lives. The one who survives will always choose duty over clarity, peacekeeping over truth, exhaustion over confrontation. But the one who chooses to live well, will embrace conflict. For the sake of integrity, he will risk rejection to be seen. He will lose comfort to find meaning. It is not a comfortable path. It will cost him. When a man begins to speak after years of silence, the system around him reacts. Some people will feel betrayed. Others will accuse him of becoming cold or selfish. But in truth, he is neither. He is awakening. And when a man awakens, false peace dies. Relationships that depended on his compliance will wither. Dynamics that relied on his suppression will collapse. But what remains? The connections, the convictions, the values will be true. And truth is what a man was built to live by. You may have been told otherwise, that being a man means being agreeable, productive, endlessly available, that your role is to absorb dysfunction quietly and never ask for more. But this definition of manhood is not strength. It is slavery in a suit. And you were not born for that. You were born to bring order, not just to the world around you, but to your own soul. You were meant to speak with weight, to act with purpose, to draw lines that protect the sacred. That is masculine responsibility, not blind obedience to external pressure, but the internal courage to choose what is right, even if no one else understands. This is what Jordan Peterson calls the heroic path, not the inflated hero of fantasy, but the real one, the one who voluntarily confronts chaos, who orders his life so that others might live in truth, who speaks even when his voice breaks, who stands even when it hurts. This man does not hide behind silence. He uses speech as a tool of integration, to say what he means, to set what he values, and to reject what poisons his integrity. And here's the paradox. The man who begins to speak, clearly, calmly and without apology, and doesn't become chaotic. He becomes grounded. His anger turns to discernment. His anxiety turns to focus. His resentment turns to direction. He no longer reacts to every demand. He filters them through his values. He no longer internalizes every failure. He distinguishes between what is his responsibility and what belongs to others. And he no longer fears being misunderstood because he understands himself. This kind of man is rare because this kind of clarity is earned through pain, through silence that became unbearable, through emotional labor that yielded no fruit, through betrayal, through fatigue, through existential disillusionment. But on the other side of that suffering is a self no longer fragmented, no longer defined by what others want, but by what is true. You have to ask yourself now, before life forces the question upon you. What have you been carrying that is not yours? What words have you swallowed that are rotting in your gut? What limits have you refused to set out of fear of rejection? These are not secondary questions. These are the foundations of your life, because until you answer them, your actions will be tainted by resentment, and your silence will be a slow suicide of the soul. There is no virtue in being agreeable if it costs you your voice. There is no strength in being calm if it means you are dying quietly. There is no nobility in being needed if it requires you to disappear. A man who truly carries himself, who owns his voice, his purpose, his suffering, does not have to carry everything else. He learns to say, "This is mine." That is not. He does not apologize for speaking. He apologizes for waiting so long to begin. And when he speaks, not to dominate, but to declare, with precision and humility, who he is, he becomes untouchable in the only way that matters. His soul becomes rooted. His presence becomes unmistakable. His silence, when it returns, is no longer repressed. It is chosen. And when silence becomes a choice, not a condition, it transforms from suppression into strength. The man who has spoken, who has confronted the chaos within and around him, no longer uses silence as a shield. He uses it as a statement. He no longer avoids conflict out of fear. He enters it when necessary, with clarity, with restraint, and with force tempered by purpose. This man is not perfect. He is not immune to pain, confusion, or the weight of the world, but he is no longer ruled by them. He is no longer reacting from wounds he doesn't understand. He carries scars, yes, but they are integrated. He remembers why he suffered. He knows what it taught him, and he uses it to build, This is where transformation begins in earnest. A man who used to be an emotional container for everyone else now becomes a center of gravity. He is not consumed by his environment. He shapes it. He does not absorb other people's chaos out of guilt. He confronts it, names it, and offers structure, not by controlling others, but by embodying order himself. Discipline returns, not as punishment, but as self-respect. His boundaries are no longer walls built out of fear, but fences constructed from truth. He no longer agrees to things to avoid discomfort. He says no with grace and without justification. He no longer performs virtue through suffering. He lives by values that are tested, chosen, and clear. And then something rare happens. He begins to experience peace. Not the hollow kind promised by productivity hacks or surface-level affirmations, but the kind born from living in alignment. His sleep becomes deeper, his presence sharper. He is not racing anymore. He is not proving anymore. He is being fully, firmly, finally. You must understand, this peace cannot be purchased or inherited. It cannot be imitated. It is not the result of being liked, approved of, or constantly needed. It is the fruit of speaking the truth consistently, ordering your life consciously, and choosing suffering that builds rather than destroys. Peterson often reminds us that to take up your cross is not to collapse under it, but to bear it willingly, eyes open, shoulders squared. The man who speaks nothing and carries everything has not taken up his cross. He has absorbed the crosses of others and called it virtue. But that is a path to annihilation, not salvation. What the world needs, and what you must become, is the man who carries what is his, only what is his, and carries it with honor, who speaks not to gain power but to reflect truth, who acts not to earn love, but because he knows what must be done. This man is rare because this man is dangerous, not to others, but to everything false. His presence calls out weakness without speaking a word. His strength threatens those built on manipulation. His peace reveals the chaos others still refuse to face. And that is why he must be forged, not born. Because this kind of man cannot be manufactured. He must be chosen by himself. So choose now. Stop carrying what is not yours. Stop performing strength you do not feel. Stop making silence your identity. Begin the process of remembering who you were before the world shaped you into a function. Speak out not loudly but truthfully. Not perfectly but deliberately. Set boundaries, not to keep others out but to keep yourself in. And understand this. The moment you speak clearly, someone will accuse you of changing. Let them. They were never meant to know the man you are becoming. Because the man who stands upright does not need to shout.